He found a little alien digging through trash. It's my mom's birthday, he said softly. The high-torque wrench in his hand slipped, the cheap, humidity-pitted metal scraping a long, bloody line across his knuckles. Rook hissed, a sharp, guttural sound in the oppressive quiet of the workshop, and threw the tool onto the workbench. It clattered against a pile of microservos, scattering them like dead insects. Everything was failing. The constant, mildewed damp of Erebus was eating his tools. The magnetic shielding on the filtration unit was sputtering with a sound like frying bacon. And the 200-kilo autojack he was trying to repair was still just a very large, very stubborn paperweight. He wiped the grease and blood on the thigh of his worn canvas pants, glaring at the stubborn piece of machinery. He'd been a damn good engineer once, top of his class at the Orbital Academy. Now he was a glorified garbage man, king of a mountain of other people's failures, and he couldn't even fix his own lift. The air, thick with the smell of ozone and rust, felt heavy in his lungs. That was when the bell chimed. It wasn't a digital alert, not a sterile beep from a proximity sensor. It was a physical brass bell rigged to a simple tripwire. An analog alarm for an analog man. He'd salvaged it from a pre-expansion nautical vessel. It meant someone was in Sector 4, the graveyard, his private stash. Rook's irritation vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar weight. He didn't get visitors, he got scav rats and claim jumpers, and he treated them all the same. He snatched his kinetic rifle from its rack by the door. It was an old-world relic, heavy with chemically propelled slugs, not lasers or plasma. It didn't rely on energy cells that could drain or smart targeting that could be hacked. It was loud, messy, and reliable. He trusted it. He moved out of the humid workshop, the blast door hissing shut behind him, sealing his small pocket of light and noise away. Outside, the perpetual twilight of the junk moon settled over him like a shroud. Towers of scrap, the skeletal remains of corporate frigates and forgotten colony ships, rose like the ribs of dead gods, their shadows long and sharp in the dim light. The air was thin, carrying the metallic tang of rust and the faint, sweet smell of damp, decaying soil. He moved silently, his worn boot soles making no sound on the packed earth and shredded metal. He knew every path, every blind corner, every loose pile of debris that might shift under a careless foot. Sector 4 was where he kept the high-value military and corporate scrap, the pieces he hadn't processed yet, intact drive cores, unscrambled navigation modules, military-grade plating. It was where a thief with a death wish would go. He rounded a rusted bulkhead that had once belonged to a Synthex cruiser. He spat at the corporate logo, still faintly visible, and stopped. They were there, a woman and a child. The woman was on her knees, her back to him, digging frantically through a pile of circuit boards and power conduits. She moved with a desperate, fluid grace, her slender arms covered in fine gray fur, disappearing up to the elbows in the debris. The child, a small, male version of her, was sorting through the pieces she tossed aside, holding a blackened power cell up to the dim light. Rook's grip tightened on the rifle. She was not human. Her body was human-like in its silhouette. A narrow waist, the curve of her hips defined by practical cargo pants, her shoulders bare above a simple tank top that clung to her form. But she was covered in that fine, downy fur, a soft gray that looked impossibly clean in this world of filth. A long, fox-like tail, thick and expressive, lay in the dirt behind her, its silver-tipped end flicking with a restless, anxious energy. Her hair was a long, silver-white mane pulled back in a practical if messy tie. Pointed, tufted ears stood high on her head, swiveling independently, constantly scanning for sounds he couldn't hear. He chambered around. The schlick-clack of the mechanism was definitive. It was the loudest sound on the moon. The woman froze, every muscle in her back went rigid. Her tail stiffened, becoming a straight, bristling line. Slowly, as if moving through deep water, she rose to her feet. She turned, and in the same fluid motion, pushed the small boy behind her legs. A low, warning sound rumbled in her chest, a vibration he felt more than heard. He'd expected a scav rat. Ragged, desperate, maybe chromed, he hadn't expected this. Her face was beautiful, sharp and angular, with high cheekbones and large, luminous eyes, a startling, vivid green. They were fixed, not on his face, but on the barrel of the rifle. "Leave," Rook said. His voice was a gravelly bark unused for days. Her tail lashed once, a sharp, angry movement that stirred the dust. Her accent was thick, her words clipped, as if she were translating from a more efficient, logical language. We require a component. We possess trade items, data chips, pharmaceutical. I don't trade with thieves, he said, keeping the rifle centered on her chest. The tank top was thin, and he could see the rapid rise and fall of her breathing. You're trespassing. You've got 10 seconds to get off my claim. We cannot, she stated. It wasn't a plea, it was a fact. The component is vital. We must have the core. The boy, braver than his mother, peeked out from behind her leg. His own small tail was wrapped around his ankle. He looked at Rook, his large green eyes curious, not terrified. It's my mom's birthday, he said softly. The woman flinched as if struck. She silenced the boy with a sharp hissed, "Hush!" She looked back at Rook, her professional mask cracking for just a second, revealing a flicker of raw desperation. For my mother, she corrected, her voice tight with the lie. I require a Kessler stabilization core to power a long-range beacon. Rook's blood went cold. A Kessler core, military grade, used for subspace transmitters and localized time dilation fields. He knew exactly where one was, not in this junk heap, but in his private safe tucked inside the workshop. It was his retirement plan, his get-off-this-rock card. You're out of luck, he said, his voice harder now. He gestured with the rifle. Leave, now. Desperation flashed in her eyes. Her tail bristled. Her hand drifted to her belt, but she stopped. She was calculating, he could see it. Calculating her chances against the rifle. Her senses were sharp, her body coiled, but he was 10 meters away and his finger was on the trigger. Her chances were 0, and she knew it. With a final, frustrated hiss, she gathered the child, her hand on the back of his head, and turned to go. She was defeated. A sudden, high-pitched whine cut through the air. Rook didn't have time to think. He didn't aim. He reacted. Down, he roared. He dove forward, grabbing the woman by the shoulder, yanking her and the child backward off their feet. He crashed down on top of her, his body shielding hers, the rifle digging into the dirt. A bolt of coherent plasma, impossibly bright, struck the exact spot where they had been standing. The scrap pile vaporized, slag and molten metal splashing against the bulkhead. The heat of it washed over his back. He was on her. His weight was pinning her to the ground. She was soft beneath him, her body trembling, the fur on her arms standing on end. Her sharp, minty scent filled his nostrils, cutting through the rust. She wasn't struggling, just staring up at him, her green eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with him or his rifle. A ship, sleek and black as obsidian, descended through the low-hanging clouds. It was silent, powered by gravity displacement drives. Its landing lights sliced through the twilight. It was Synthex, corporate hunters. Synthex, the woman snarled, the word a curse, her tail bushed out, stiff with fear. They found us. Rook rolled off her, scrambling to his feet and pulling her up by the arm. The ship's ventral cannon began to glow, charging for another shot. He cursed, loudly and fluently. He looked at the ship, a top-of-the-line asset tracker. He looked at the woman, Vesper. He looked at the wide, terrified eyes of the child. He made a choice. It was a stupid choice. It was the choice that had cost him his career. In the shop, he yelled, grabbing her arm. Move, now! Rook half-dragged, half threw them toward the reinforced steel door of his workshop, the child, Milo, tucked securely against the woman's chest. Another plasma bolt hit the ground where he had been standing, spraying his back with hot gravel and the acrid smell of vaporized metal. He shoved them through the narrow doorway and slammed his hand against the emergency activation panel. The heavy blast door groaned, sliding shut with the definitive, echoing boom of a bank vault ceiling. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by 3 sets of lungs gasping for air and the high-pitched, struggling whine of his filtration unit. The woman, Vesper, scrambled to the darkest corner of the shop, putting her body between him and her son. She was a perfect, coiled spring of maternal terror, her back against a stack of salvaged power cells. Her tail was a rigid brush of gray fur, and she watched him, her chest heaving, her luminous green eyes darting from the sealed door to him, back to the door. He was the immediate threat, but the one outside was the extinction-level one. Talk, Rook demanded. He didn't lower the rifle, but he kept it pointed at the floor. What is that? And what does it want with you? Asset tracker, Vesper said, her voice a low vibration, clipped and precise. Hunter class, piloted. She will not scan for life. She is scanning for the core. The one in my safe, you mean, he growled. He stalked past her to a dusty console in the corner, wiping a layer of grease from the primary security screen. Your beacon just brought a corporate death squad to my door. She was already here, Vesper countered, her voice tight. She has been tracking us since Kylon Prime. This moon's magnetic interference was a temporary solution. We detected the core's energy signature upon approach. We had no choice. A heavy, resonant thud vibrated through the concrete floor of the workshop. The hunter ship had landed. Rook watched it on his low-tech, grainy security feed. It was a predator settling in his territory, its black, silent form dominating the yard. A ventral ramp lowered and a tall, slender figure emerged. It was encased in black, non-reflective armor that seemed to drink the dim light, and it moved with a terrifying liquid grace. The figure began a methodical, sweeping scan of the yard, its helmeted head turning toward the workshop. This shop won't hold, Rook said, more to himself than to her. The walls were reinforced, but not against military-grade plasma cutters. He moved to the back of the shop, to a large industrial steel safe built into the foundation. So you're an asset? I am Vesper, she replied flatly, her ears swiveling, listening to the high-frequency sounds of the hunter's scanner, sounds he couldn't even detect. The child is Milo. We are escaped Synthex property. He spun the combination lock, the heavy metal tumblers clicking loudly in the tense quiet. 34, 18, 52. And mother? The formative AI of the Enclave, Vesper said. She raised us. The birthday is a pre-arranged activation window. The gift is the beacon signal. It activates the safe haven, a network for others like us. The safe hissed open. Inside, nestled on a bed of worn black velvet, was the Kessler stabilization core. It was a perfect sphere of interlocking silver rings, humming with a barely contained potential energy, its light pulsing softly. It was his retirement, his get-off-this-rock card, his way out. He thought of a small cantina on a warm beach, a place where things didn't rust, a place where he wasn't alone. He looked from the sphere to the small vulpine boy who was now peeking around his mother's leg, his large green eyes wide with a terror that was heartbreakingly silent. Synthex doesn't get to own children. The thought was sharp, brutal, and it made the decision for him. He snatched the core from the safe. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who was tired of bullies. He turned and threw the core at her. It was a hard, underhand toss. Vesper caught it with a gasp, her reflexes impossibly fast, her slender, furred fingers closing around the sphere. She looked at it, then at him, her expression a mask of profound confusion. This way, he barked, moving past the sputtering autojack toward a massive, oil-stained tarp that covered the back third of the hangar. He ripped it away with one violent pull. Underneath was his ship, the Rust Bucket. It was an old, heavily modified Q-class freighter. Its hull was a patchwork of mismatched plates, its landing gear was stained with streaks of hydraulic fluid, and its engines were obscenely oversized. Chemical propulsion units bolted onto the frame with heavy industrial welds. Vesper stared at it, and her ears, which had been alert, drooped. "This relic," she whispered, her voice laced with a genuine logical disgust. "Its energy signature is a catastrophe. It has no stealth capabilities. It is illogical." "It is," Rook said, climbing the ramp and keying the cockpit door. "And she'll expect high-tech evasion. She'll expect signal spoofing, light bending, and grav shielding. I use this." He tapped his temple with a greasy finger. "It's chaotic. She can't predict it. Now get in." A metallic, high-pitched screech echoed from the front of the shop. It was the sound of a thermal lance beginning to cut through the blast door. A perfect, glowing orange circle began to appear on the thick steel. He didn't wait. He half-shoved Vesper into the co-pilot's seat. It was a cramped space, not designed for a passenger, let alone one with her. Attributes. Her knees were jammed against the console, and her long, furred tail was crushed uncomfortably against the bulkhead, making her wince. Milo scrambled in after her, curling into the small, dark space behind the seat. "Strap in," Rook ordered, dropping into his own well-worn pilot's chair. He didn't bother with pre-flight checks. He slammed his fist onto the ignition panel. The chemical engines roared to life, not with a clean, electric hum, but with a deep, percussive boom that shook the entire workshop. Dust and small tools vibrated off the shelves. The rust bucket strained against its ancient docking clamps. Vesper's eyes were wide, her hands gripping the crash bar, her short, sharp claws digging into the worn padding. "She's through the door." "Good," Rook grinned, a feral, unfamiliar expression. He yanked a heavy, black and yellow striped lever marked with a hand-painted skull and crossbones. He didn't fly up. He didn't wait for the hangar doors to open. Explosive bolts detonated under the floor, severing the rust bucket from its clamps. He slammed the throttle forward, and the ship launched, propelled by raw, uncontrolled chemical thrust. It smashed through the unshielded back wall of his own hangar in a catastrophic explosion of sheet metal, concrete, and debris. The artificial G-force was brutal, pinning Vesper into her seat. Alarms screamed as the ship's sensors registered a dozen hull breaches, all of them superficial. The debris cloud was thick on their scopes, a perfect analog smokescreen. The hunter, surprised by the sheer primitive violence of the maneuver, was momentarily blinded, its sensors flooded with a cloud of physical junk. "Hold on," Rook growled. He pushed the ship low, scraping the canyons and valleys formed by his own mountains of scrap. The rust bucket handled like a drunk elephant, but he knew its every flaw. Vesper was pressed against him, her shoulder to his, her thigh rigid against his. The cockpit was small, hot, and vibrating violently. He was hyper-focused, his scent filling the small space. It was not a sterile, synthesized smell. It was deeply animal, sweat, engine oil, and the sharp, metallic tang of his own adrenaline. He had to reach across her to slam a panel, rerouting power to the damaged port stabilizer. His forearm, corded with muscle and stained with grease, brushed hard against her chest, pressing into the soft, furred curve of her breast. She inhaled sharply, a tiny, involuntary gasp, her fur prickling, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. Her luminous eyes were fixed on his face, on the fierce concentration in his eyes, the feral intensity of his movements. Her tail, which had been rigid with fear, gave a single, small, confused curl against the bulkhead. He glanced at her, a quick, silent acknowledgement of her proximity before turning back to the controls. "She's coming," he said. The Black Hunter ship, its systems cleared, rose from the ruins of his shop like a wraith and arrowed after them. The pursuit was immediate and brutal. The rust bucket screamed through the junk moon's thin atmosphere, its chemical engines burning a furious, inefficient orange against the perpetual twilight. It handled like a brick, and Rook was fighting the controls with every muscle in his arms and back. The sleek Synthex hunter ship was a scalpel to his sledgehammer, closing the distance with effortless, silent grace, its movements so precise they were chilling. "She's locking weapons," Vesper reported, her voice flat, professional. She was strapped into the co-pilot's chair, her knuckles white where she gripped the console. Her furred, pointed ears were rigid, angled backward, listening to the high-frequency lock-on tones he couldn't hear. "Her predictive targeting is tracking our engine output. She will fire in 10 seconds. "Good," Rook grunted. "She's smart, too smart." He did the last thing her tactical mind or the hunters would ever expect. He cut the main engine. The sudden deafening silence was more shocking than the roar. The vibration ceased. The crushing G-force vanished, replaced by a stomach-lurching weightlessness. They were in a dead fall, tumbling end over end out of the atmosphere. Alarms shrieked. Vesper shot a look of pure, unadulterated panic at him, her body straining against the harness. On the tactical display, the hunter's red targeting lock failed. Its predictive algorithm trying to find an engine signature that was no longer there. "Now," he grunted and yanked a heavy black and yellow striped lever. A series of violent, percussive thumps slammed them sideways. Hidden maneuvering thrusters, salvaged from a military gunship and powered by compressed gas, fired in a chaotic, asynchronous pattern that Rook controlled manually. The rust bucket didn't just change direction. It began to spin, end over end, in a completely unpredictable, unpowered trajectory, falling backward toward the moon's surface. The hunter ship, built for speed and high-logic precision, was momentarily baffled by the cloud of raw, kinetic chaos. It overshot them completely. The rust bucket's comms crackled to life, a burst of static that resolved into a voice. It was crisp and cold, filtered through a processor, yet still retaining the underlying vulpine cadence. It was like Vesper's, but without the slight tremor of emotion, the warmth of life. Asset Vesper, cease resisting. Your flight pattern is illogical and self-destructive. Surrender the child must be returned. Vesper went rigid. Her blood seemed to turn to ice. Her head snapped toward the comms unit, her ears flat against her skull, her lips pulling back from her teeth in a snarl. "No," she whispered, a sound of pure defiance. "You," Vesper breathed, her voice shaking as the main screen, which had been showing tactical data, flickered to an incoming visual. The face that appeared was vulpine, like Vesper, but older, her gray fur marked with a long, pink scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. Her eyes were the same luminous green, but they were cold, professional, and held a chilling, absolute certainty. She was not wearing a helmet. She was showing her face, a deliberate psychological move. "I am Seris," she said. "I am Model 3. Your mother is a rogue program, Vesper. A logic error. I am not here to decommission you. I am taking you home." The revelation hit Vesper like a physical blow. This wasn't a faceless corporate agent. This was Seris, the first of their line, the big sister of the Enclave, the one all subsequent models were based on. She was being hunted by family. She's here to save me," Vesper murmured. Her programming and her burgeoning instincts were at war. The logic was crushing her. Seris was superior. Seris was correct. Her own actions, her fear, her flight, they were the error. Her gaze became distant, unfocused. Her tail, which had been a brush of defiance, went limp, lying on the seat like a dead thing. Her hands fell from the console into her lap. She was disassociating. Rook saw it. He saw the light go out of her eyes. He saw the ingrained slave-like obedience surfacing, the asset overriding the Vesper. He cursed, his voice a low growl. He slammed his fist on the engine ignition, restarting them with a deafening roar that shook the entire ship. The rust bucket shuddered, pulling out of its spin, the G-force a welcome, painful slap. He aimed them for the upper atmosphere. "Family doesn't hunt you with plasma cannons," he growled, his voice low and harsh. He didn't look at her, his eyes locked on the tactical display, watching Seris bank in a tight, perfect arc. "She's not your sister. She's just a better trained slave." His words, brutal and direct, cut through her programmed confusion. Slave. The word was a toxin, a truth. He was right. Her hand, which had gone limp, clenched into a fist, her short black claws extending with a faint snick. "We need cover," she said, her voice regaining a fraction of its strength. "She's faster. She'll be on us in 30 seconds. "I know." Rook pointed the rust bucket toward the system's massive, swirling gas giant, a colossal monster of green and brown clouds. "We're hiding in the shroud." The shroud was a dense, roiling belt of electromagnetic interference, a graveyard of asteroids, ice, and atmospheric discharge. It was a storm that would fry the rust bucket's basic systems, let alone the hunter's advanced sensors. It was suicide. It was perfect. They dove into the churning, green-tinged clouds. The effect was instantaneous. The cabin was plunged into total darkness as the main power failed, the overtaxed generators shorting out. A split second later, the dim red glow of emergency battery lights flickered on, painting the cockpit in a hellish, claustrophobic glow. Alarms, now on backup power, blared a low, repetitive, two-tone warning. The ship shook violently, ice and gravel pinging off the hull like small arms fire. Vesper was trembling, her whole body vibrating with the ship. Her tail was wrapped so tightly around her legs it was almost invisible. From the space behind her seat, the child, Milo, whimpered, a thin, terrified sound. "The core," Rook said, his voice quiet in the sudden, violent dark. He unstrapped and moved into the narrow space behind her seat where she had hooked up the Kessler core. He flicked on a heavy, battery-powered lantern, and a cone of bright, white light illuminated the cramped space. He could feel her watching him, her head turned, her eyes wide and luminous in the red gloom. My interface is Synthex," she said, her voice small. "This ship, it is archaic. I cannot speak to it." "It's not data, it's plumbing," he said. He crouched beside her, the space so tight his shoulder pressed against hers. He took her hand, his calloused, grease-stained fingers wrapped around hers. Her hand was slender, covered in soft fur, impossibly delicate, but her claws had pricked out from her fingertips in her anxiety. He didn't flinch. He guided her hand to the interface he'd built for the core, a jury-rigged mess of copper wires, repurposed conduits, and human-made soldering. "You're engineered for data," he murmured, his voice low, his face inches from her ear. He had to speak to be heard over the storm's roar. "This is just scrap. Stop thinking. Feel it. Find the energy flow." She could feel his breath on her neck, ruffling her fur, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. His scent, that overwhelming, deeply male mix of sweat and oil, was grounding. It was real. His touch was rough, his skin abrasive, but it wasn't commanding. It wasn't the cold, clinical touch of a Synthex handler. It was guiding. She closed her eyes. Her Synthex-engineered senses, trained to parse petabytes of data, kicked in. She could feel the chaotic energy of the storm outside, a deafening roar of static. But underneath it, she could feel the steady, powerful hum of the Kessler core and the thrum of the human's crude, battery-powered life support systems. She focused, her fingers tracing the connections he had made. His hand was still on top of hers, a warm, heavy, possessive weight. It wasn't unpleasant. Her tail slowly began to unwind from her legs, its tip giving a single confused flick. "I have it," she whispered. "Good girl," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. It wasn't the voice of a master praising an asset. It was the voice of a partner. "Get it ready." The rust bucket shuddered, its hull groaning a continuous, low-frequency complaint as a chunk of ice the size of an autojack careened off the port bow. They had been in the storm for an hour, an agonizing, deafening eternity. The red emergency lights painted the cockpit in a hellish glow, flashing in time with the wail of the proximity alarms. Vesper had done it. Working in the cramped, dark space, with Rook's solid, warm presence at her back, she had successfully jury-rigged the Kessler core. Her slender, furred fingers had flown over the analog plumbing, her Synthex-trained mind adapting, learning the chaotic physical logic of Rook's systems. She had integrated the core with the ship's ancient, chemical-powered long-range comm array. Her hands were steady now. The proximity of the human, his low, rumbling voice guiding her, his absolute confidence in her. It had focused her. "The beacon point is a null zone," she reported, her voice crisp over the roar of the storm. She was strapped back into the co-pilot's chair, all business, but her tail was resting in a loose, alert coil by her feet, no longer tight with terror. "Coordinates 88J Gamma. A dead sector, no relays. A transmission from there is theoretically untraceable." "Theoretically," Rook grunted. He was fighting the helm with short, brutal yanks, his muscles bunched under his grease-stained shirt. The rust bucket was a pig in this kind of turbulence. How long to get there? "At this speed, 20 minutes once we are clear of the shroud," she calculated. "But Seris will be waiting. She knows the protocol. The null zone is the only logical destination for a long-range transmission." "She knows the Synthex protocols," he finished for her, glancing at the tactical display. It was useless in the storm, just a screen full of swirling green-white static. "She'll anticipate a high-velocity run from the storm's edge straight to the coordinates. She'll be waiting for us at the finish line." "She will," Vesper agreed, her ears flattening. "Her ship is faster. She will intercept us before we can complete the transmission sequence. It is an unsolvable problem." "Good." A feral grin touched Rook's lips, a brief flash of teeth in the red gloom. "So we're not going to run the race." He pulled up a different schematic on his console. It wasn't a star chart, it was a map of a debris field. A dense, chaotic graveyard of derelict freighters from the old colonial wars. It lay directly between them and the null zone, a massive, dark blot on the map. "The graveyard of giants," he murmured. "She's waiting for us to go around it. We're going through it." Vesper's head snapped toward him, her green eyes wide. "That is not a calculated risk, that is suicide. The field is too dense, navigational sensors will be useless, hull integrity will fail." "The hull will hold," he said, his knuckles white on the yoke. "She's a Q ship, built to haul, not to look pretty. But Seris won't follow. Her ship is built for precision, for clean kills in open space. It's not built for a bar fight." Without waiting for another argument, he angled the rust bucket up, punching them toward the storm's ceiling. The moment they breached the shroud, the silence was as shocking as the engine cutoff had been. The violent shaking stopped. The roar of the ice ceased. They were in the black, starry void, and Seris was there. The hunter ship was a black dagger hanging in the void, precisely between them and the jump point to the null zone. She was a spider in the center of her web. "She's hailing us," Vesper said, her voice tight. "Ignore it," Rook said. He jammed the throttle forward, main engines igniting with a bone-jarring roar. But he didn't aim for Seris. He didn't aim for the null zone. He aimed directly at the massive dark cloud of the debris field. "That is not the correct vector," Vesper stated again, but this time it wasn't a statement of fact. It was a protest. "Hang on," he yelled. He flew the rust bucket straight into the freighter graveyard at full burn. It was like flying through a collapsing mountain range in the dark. Massive skeletal remains of capital ships, some kilometers long, tumbled in slow, silent orbits. Jagged plates of armor, spinning engine blocks, and tangled webs of rebar and conduit filled the void. Rook was no longer piloting. He was reacting, a dervish of focused kinetic energy. His hands were a blur on the manual thrusters, his feet working the rudder pedals, forcing the heavy ship to dance. The helm was slick with his sweat. "Portside, bulkhead, 40 meters, Vesper yelled, her voice sharp. Her vulpine eyes, adapted for low-light hunting, could see the glint of metal and ice he had missed. He slammed the lateral thrusters, and a jagged spar of rebar, coated in white frost, scraped the cockpit glass. It was close enough for Vesper to see the micro-fractures in the ice, close enough that she flinched, her claws digging into the armrests. "Starboard, 30 degrees, a cargo container, it's venting." "Got it," he roared, rolling the ship in a sluggish barrel roll, the rust bucket's hull groaning in protest. They were in perfect frantic sync. She was his eyes, his early warning system. He was the muscle, the instinct, the raw, chaotic pilot. This was his world. This was salvage. "I'm detecting a massive energy signature, dead ahead," she shouted. "A drive core, it's unstable." A massive spinning engine block, glowing with a faint, sickly purple energy, tumbled toward them. It was the size of his workshop. There was no way around it. "Brace," he yelled. He didn't evade. He didn't slow down. He fired his main engines, accelerating directly into the object's spin, using the block's own massive momentum to slingshot them around it. The G-force was crushing. It pinned Vesper back into her seat, her harness straining, her breath driven from her lungs in a sharp whoosh. The ship screamed, a high-pitched metallic shriek of stressed metal. "Now!" Rook shouted over the din, his voice strained. "The null zone is on the other side. We're in range. Fire the beacon, Vesper. Fire it now!" She had to do it now, in the middle of the chaotic, high-G maneuver, her body weighing 3 times its normal amount. Her fingers, strong and slender, flew across the console she had built. The human and Synthex tech merged into one. The ship shook so hard they were thrown against each other, his shoulder slamming into hers. "I can't get a lock," she yelled, her voice frantic, tinged with her first note of true panic. "The interference from the core, the ship's motion, it's not stable." He took his right hand off the yoke, leaving his left to fight the spin. He slammed his hand over hers on the console, his palm rough and calloused against the soft fur on the back of her hand, his strength undeniable. He forced the activation key down, his fingers locking with hers. "It's not a smart lock, Vesper, it's a goddamn shotgun," he roared. "Trust it! Trust me!" He pressed. She pressed back. Together they forced the key home. The Kessler core engaged. There was no sound, but a wave of energy, visible even to the naked eye as a faint distortion, pulsed from the ship. A single, compressed, untraceable burst of data, fired like a bullet through the debris field, toward the null zone. The beacon was sent. Mother had it. Vesper slumped, her adrenaline draining away, leaving her exhausted but triumphant. "It's sent," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She has it." They burst through the far side of the debris field. The rust bucket's hull was scarred and dented, one engine sputtering black, unburnt fuel. The cockpit was filled with the smell of ozone and overheated circuits. And the hunter was there. Seris was right in front of them, hanging in the black, weapons hot. She hadn't been waiting at the null zone. She had tracked their energy signature, anticipated his illogical move, cut through the debris field on a different, cleaner vector, and was waiting for them to emerge. "She played me," Rook whispered, his blood running cold. "Your rebellion is over, Vesper." Seris's cold voice came over the comms, no longer hailing, just broadcasting. "Your chaos is predictable." Before Rook could even react, before he could slam the thrusters into a desperate dive, the hunter's plasma cannon fired. The bolt, a blinding white spear, struck the rust bucket high on the starboard side, ripping through the primary engine manifold and the main power conduit. Alarms screamed, a single deafening dying wail. The cockpit, which had been a symphony of flashing red lights, went dark. The hum of the engines, the vibration of the hull, the flow of the air, everything just stopped. They were adrift, powerless, a sitting duck. The rust bucket was dead in the water. Not just damaged, but dead. The silence was a physical weight, a crushing, cold void. The only light in the cockpit came from the flashing red of a single battery-powered damage indicator and the cold, indifferent starlight that streamed through the cockpit glass. The smell of burnt insulation and ozone was thick, acrid. In the blackness, Rook could hear the panicked, shallow breaths from Vesper and the tiny, terrified whimper from Milo behind the seat. "Your illogical resistance is over, Vesper." Seris's voice echoed through the comms, which had flickered back on, powered by the hunter's broadcast. It was devoid of triumph, a simple, cold statement of fact. "Your primitive vessel is neutralized. Surrender the human and the child. They are collateral, contaminants. I am opening the docking bay to retrieve you. Come home." Rook looked at the hunter ship on the screen. It was slowly, confidently approaching. Seris was right. They were beaten. But he wasn't dead yet. "The escape pod is aft," Rook said, his voice a low, rough growl in the dark. He unstrapped and was already pulling open a panel beneath his console, his hands finding the wiring by touch alone. "It's a one-shot, chemical propellant, no energy signature, good for you and the kid. It'll get you to the surface of the nearest planetoid, Erebus Gamma. You can hide in the canyons there." Vesper was just a silhouette in the dim red light, but he could feel her eyes on him. "And you?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I'm a salvager," he grunted, yanking a thick bundle of wires. He found the two he was looking for and began stripping them with his teeth. "I'm going to give her something to salvage." He was rerouting the last of the ship's battery power, the emergency reserves that kept the life support humming, into one single hidden system. A system that didn't show up on any schematic. She watched him. She watched his hands, strong and sure, working in the dark. He was chaotic, illogical. He was a creature of impulse and emotion. And he had just tried to sacrifice himself for her and her son, beings he had met only hours ago, beings who had brought this doom to his door. She unstrapped, her movements fluid and silent. She placed her hand on his, stopping him. His hands froze. He looked up, surprised. Her furred, slender fingers were stark against his own, which were stained with grease and his own dried blood. Her touch was not a plea, it was an order. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steel. It was the voice of someone who had just made a final, irrevocable choice. Her tail, he could just make it out in the starlight, was steady, moving with a slow, deliberate, predatory determination. "I am not a slave," she said, her voice dropping lower. "And I am not an asset." She looked past him through the cockpit glass at the approaching hunter ship. "And she is not my family." Her sharp, luminous eyes, perfectly adapted to this darkness, scanned his console. Her analytical mind, designed by Synthex, was no longer at war with itself. It was a weapon, and now it was working for him. She pointed to a schematic he had left open before the power failed. "Your kinetic rifle," she said, her finger tracing a line he thought was hidden. "You didn't just mount it. You repurposed the mass driver from the autojack you were repairing. You amplified it, a magnetic railgun." A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face, a flash of teeth. "A little birthday present of my own, was saving it for a rainy day." "She needs us alive," Vesper murmured, her mind racing, her logic now a rapier. "Her primary order is to retrieve the assets, especially the child. She will not fire again. She will move in for docking and retrieval." "A tractor beam," Rook said, catching her train of thought, his heart starting to pound. "Or physical clamps. And she'll have to drop her shields to do it." She's moving, Vesper said, watching the hunter ship now only a few kilometers out, its ventral bay doors beginning to slide open, a maw of light in the darkness. It's primed, Rook finished his work, connecting the final wire. The railgun had power, just enough for one shot. But I've got no main power, the controls are dead. I can't aim the damn thing, it's fixed, spinal-mounted. Use the maneuvering thrusters, she said instantly, as if she'd known all along. The ones you used in the storm, the compressed gas. They aren't on the power grid, they are analog. He laughed, a short, harsh bark that was loud in the silence. Get the kid strapped in, now! She secured Milo in the co-pilot's seat, strapping the harness tight, pressing her furred face to his. Do not be afraid, my son, she whispered, her voice a fierce maternal rumble. He is with us, we are with him. She returned to Rook's side, standing behind him in the cramped dead cockpit. The hunter ship was large now, eclipsing the stars. Its open docking bay was a glowing invitation. She placed her hand on his on the weapons control, her furred palm pressing against his skin, her claws just lightly grazing his knuckles. Together, she said. It wasn't a request. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching ship. He could feel the slight tremor in her hand, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation. His other hand went to the heavy manual levers for the gas thrusters. On my mark. He fired the thrusters. A series of hollow thumps echoed through the dead hull. The rust bucket groaned, rotating with agonizing slowness, its nose swinging toward the hunter. On the hunter's bridge, Seris must have seen the movement. The ship paused, as if confused by the primitive, unexpected maneuver. A dead ship shouldn't be able to move. Now, Vesper whispered, her voice a breath on his ear, her shields are down. Mark! Rook roared and slammed his fist down onto the firing stud, Vesper's hand trapped, driving down with his. It wasn't a beam of light, it wasn't a pulse of energy, it was a solid slug of scavenged adamantium, 10 kilos of dead, dumb weight, fired from a magnetic railgun at a fraction of light speed. The slug, pure kinetic energy, hit the hunter ship at its most vulnerable point, the open, unshielded docking bay. It ripped through the internal bulkhead, tore through the ship's engine block, and exited the other side in a silent, blossoming cloud of debris and frozen coolant. The sleek black ship didn't explode, it simply died. Its lights went out, its gravity drives failed. It was a cold, dark tomb adrift. Silence, utter, complete silence filled the cockpit. Rook was panting, his adrenaline fading. Vesper was trembling, her head bowed, her hand still on his. A new light flickered on. Vesper's console, powered by the Kessler core, pinged softly. A single text-only message appeared in glowing green letters. Safe haven coordinates received, network active, welcome home, my children, welcome to the rebellion. Vesper let out a breath she'd been holding for a lifetime. A tear traced a line through the fur on her cheek. A second message followed immediately. Synthex fleet inbound to Erebus system. Kessler beacon trace detected, they know, 72 hours. The victory was gone, replaced by a colder, harder reality. Rook looked at the dead hunter ship floating just a kilometer away. That thing's got a working drive once we patch the hole. Better guns, a full power core, and armor that can take a hit. Vesper looked at him, and for the first time she smiled. It was a sharp, feral expression, all teeth and promise, mirroring his own. Her tail gave a slow, deliberate, sensual wave. And you, she said, her voice a low purr that vibrated through him, know how to fix it. Her son, Milo, unstrapped himself and came to stand between them in the dark. He didn't say a word. He just took Rook's bloody, calloused hand in one of his, and his mother's furred hand in the other. Rook looked down at the small boy, at the way their 3 hands were joined. He looked at Vesper, her green eyes luminous in the starlight, watching him with an intensity that held no fear, only everything else. They were a makeshift, broken family adrift in a field of wreckage. But they were alive, and they were together. Right, Rook said, his voice rough. He squeezed the small hand, and his thumb brushed over the back of Vesper's. Let's go salvage our ride. They were no longer running, they were preparing for the war.